I think if we can educate our kids well, then it's our best chance to have a better world.
And why do we still believe that we're the same person? Grown, you've matured, but you still are the same person. And sometimes I joke with students and I say, I did everything I could not to get a real job.
They bother me because I made the decision. But they're nothing that's ever going to put us on our knees.
Very early in my life, I realized that having access to knowledge was kind of a critical way. Happiness is not measured by a sign of dollars. It's measured by the level of liberty that you have.
As a species, probably we'll survive. I mean, there's 7.6 billion of us. You can't get rid of us that easy.
And that is a wrap. Three, two, one, and welcome everyone to another episode of Masters of the Universe, where we bring in folks who are, pioneers in pushing forward human boundaries, human thinking, progress, and culture. And today we have Professor Ollivier Dyens. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. From McGill University. And Professor Ollivier and I, we go way back. I mean, we know each other for 4 years. He's been a friend, a mentor. And just a bit about him, he graduated in film production from Concordia back in the day. And after that, he has a PhD in comparative literature from UDM?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And then after that, you start teaching as a faculty member. You were a full professor at Concordia, and eventually became the vice provost of student life and learning at Concordia. And then after that,
it was vice provost teaching and learning.
Vice provost of teaching and learning.
Yeah,
perfect.
A bit easier than student life.
All right, perfect. And then after that, you joined McGill as the deputy provost of student life and learning.
Right.
And your most recent focus is Building 21.
Right.
Which is this, I believe it's inspired by MIT.
Yes.
And it's a space for creativity, for doing edge projects,
right.
Loon shots, moon shots. So we're going to have an exciting discussion. We're going to talk about Professor Olivier's life. We're going to talk about his work. And we're going to talk about the future.
Looking forward to it, Danielle.
All right, perfect. So film production, Concordia.
Right.
From there to vice provost of student life and learning at 2 universities.
Yes.
Both Concordia and McGill.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Oh my God, it's a long story.
We have all the time in the world.
Okay. Sometimes I joke with some students that, so I did, as you said, my bachelor's degree in film production, then I did a master's degree in film studies, and then a PhD in comparative literature. And sometimes I joke with students and I say I did everything I could not to get a real job, but I ended up with a real job. So, how did that happen? It's a series of detours of things that happen. Of course, the cliche hard work, but it is part of it.
Right.
A bit of luck. Sometimes things happen at the right time for you. I was ready, for example, to get a job in academia in the early 2000s when there was a huge, at least in Canada, a huge wave of hiring.
Okay.
And this is a bit, out of your control. This being said, there's a couple of things I think I've learned through that, winding path. The first one is, in no particular order here, Danielle, but I think the first one is nothing that I've done was ever lost, I would say. Nothing that I've done seriously was ever lost. So
was ever lost?
Yeah, in the sense of, how is film production useful for a deputy provost of student life and learning?
Yeah.
It is useful because, or how is literature useful for a deputy provost of student life and learning? It is useful because these two disciplines, they teach you to tell a story. And when you become a senior executive like you are, a lot of it is telling a story.
Yeah.
A lot of it is to be able to express your ideas clearly and to attract people to your ideas, to bring them in. So that was extraordinarily useful for me. I coached also when I was younger, and that was also very useful, even though it has nothing to do with what I do directly today. But coaching is teaching. Coaching is bringing a group together toward one common objective, which is actually what you do in a classroom or in lab or in research. So, even the things that I did in between, because I'm at the border between the boomers and the Xers. I consider myself a Generation X. So when I graduated from my undergraduate degree, the economy was in shambles. Unemployment in Quebec was 15%.
Wow.
Mortgage rate, my father bought a house in 1982, mortgage rate 18%. So
18%?
18%.
We're complaining at like a few percentage right now.
So it was a really difficult moment. So like many people in my generation did all sorts of odd jobs. My wife and I at one point counted, and I said, how many jobs did we have? And I said, okay, I'm going to count a job. A job counts as like the criteria for counting a job as a job, because in some of them I didn't last for very long, was I got a paycheck from someone. And I'm not joking, Danielle, I stopped at 40. So I had 40 employers in my life. And if you think that in the last 20 years I had about 3 or 4, that means the first years were really intense. But none of this actually was lost. But even being a waiter in a pizzeria was not lost, because you learn things.
Right.
Of course, when you're in the middle of it, you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
You feel like you're pretty lost. But a couple of things I think have sort of helped me. Probably because of my education, probably because of my parents. I've always felt quite confident in myself. I had great moments of doubts, but I knew where my strengths were and still are, and also I probably know where my weaknesses are. So this is, you ask me how did I do this, and that would be an advice I'm trying to give to a lot of young people. I'm a big disbeliever in follow your dreams. First of all, because I've heard it over and over and over again. I've been to very, very many convocations in my life, probably around 50, and everyone says that, and it's just too much after a while, and I just don't believe it. I think the key is follow your strength, much more than follow your dreams.
Interesting.
So, and I followed my strengths because I didn't really have that much choice, because it's just easier, because you feel better, because when you follow your strength, you're also more motivated in moving forward, because you feel like you're doing things with greater quality than, if you're outside of your strengths. And usually it helps you, it drives you to follow your strength, and people will recognize this, right? So that's one thing I've recognized, is following your strength is something quite crucial. And what I've realized also later on in my life, when I became deputy provost, which was very different from what I wanted to do. When I was younger, my dream was to become the great American or Canadian, North American writer. I wanted to be a novelist and a poet. I did part of it, not a novelist, but I wrote a lot, and I'm happy about it. But so that was my great dream. So how do you go from being a novelist, or wanting to be a novelist or a poet, to being a manager? Essentially, that's what I was, a manager, a senior manager, until I realized that there's actually a lot of creativity when you get to some senior levels. The creativity is different, but it's there. And this is one thing I've realized, is that what your strengths, they are not exclusive to one job. So you think that being creative is, the exclusive domain of artists. But, when you're a manager, senior manager, and you're faced with, change management, you have to be extraordinarily creative.
Yeah.
It's a different creativity, but it is very creative. When you have to bring in a new product on the market, for example, in your case, or when you have to bring a new program, in the case of academia, on the market, you have to be extraordinarily creative. And I found, when I was deputy provost, and vice provost, I found a lot of pleasure in that. There was a lot of creativity. It was very different, but it still fulfilled me in what I wanted to do. So really the keys to me are, hard work is a cliche, but again, it does make a difference. But following your strengths and realizing that your strengths and the things you like, they're not exclusive to one job. They're all over the place. The need to be competitive. I'm very competitive. The need to be competitive. You find it mostly in sport, but you find it in business. You find it in academia. I mean, there's other ways to express competitivity. And once you realize this, then you decouple job from your you decouple jobs from your self-worth, because we tend to put our self-worth into a job. I have a job in mind, and if I get it, I want to be a doctor, for example. If I get it, I have my self-worth has increased. If I don't get it, I become a pharmacist, because at least in France, pharmacists are those who haven't made it as doctors.
Right.
Then my self-worth is less. Well, what pushed you to become a doctor? Was it the competitive nature of it, the needed to research the human body? There are different ways that can probably be found in the pharmaceutical industry. So this is like a winding, long answer to your difficult question.
It's funny because, a lot of the path that you've been through, this is what we're talking about as millennials and Gen Z, right? The world has changed, right? It's no longer about one career. It's about multiple careers, right? Follow our dreams, follow our passion. We don't know what we want to do. But in your case, you've had 40 different jobs until you found your path. And I feel like it's almost like all of them were just a piece of the puzzle. It wasn't an obstacle. It was more around everything helped enable you to get to where you are.
Right. But again, you're totally right, Danielle. But again, that's in hindsight.
Yeah.
When you're in the middle of it, it's much more difficult. So it's not as if I knew from the beginning, I want to do this. This is going to help me go to that point and that point. You're sort of lost, right? You're in the middle of that tsunami of things.
Right.
And sometimes you feel like you're actually, you're actually stepping away from what you want to do. You're actually drifting away. But I've realized that what you acquire as different skills, like being a waiter is a very different from being a literature professor, but some of the skills you acquire of, being able to talk to people, being able to be more social with people are actually very useful.
So there is a chance for the non-STEM students, right?
You know what? It's funny because that's also something I've realized is that, and I've told students a lot. Of course, I've got my own biases on this, right? But and I see the world from my own perspective. But what I tell students is that the ability to write more than correctly, the ability to write at a higher level, right? To be writing at a higher level, and the ability to read at a higher level. You can tell me if you agree with me or not, Daniel. I think as a manager and as someone who hired a lot of people, I thought this was extraordinarily valuable. People who could write and read at a high level. So, the sciences and the STEMs are absolutely necessary at other levels. I get that, but there's still a huge amount of work. There's a huge amount of demand for people who can handle the written word. And there's a huge demand, and academia probably is not doing a good enough job with that, but there's a huge demand today with the technologies and all the new territories of ethics that are being discovered right now. We need people who are able to think about these things. So I'm not worried about the humanities at all.
That's interesting. And so how was it like being first as a faculty member, and then switching to being to the dark side, as as some students may call it, being a vice provost, where you're part of the administration, you're part of the bureaucracy, as you want to call it,
right?
And how was that experience?
Well, again, it's not always a path you have in mind. So, to make a long story short, it first started when I became chair of my department at Concordia, only because the previous chair had completed her mandate of it was 10 years, so she stepped away, I'm sorry. And then because no one ever wants to be chair. No one wanted to do it.
Really?
So
Okay.
Nobody wants to do it. And so they asked me, do you want to do it? And I said, yeah, I'll try it. And I realized what we had said earlier. I realized that, it could be creative. strategic, and mostly I realized that I was seeing the institution from a very different perspective, and it was a really interesting perspective. Problems are different, and from chair I became vice provost and deputy provost, and the more I climbed the ladder, the more interesting the problems were, because suddenly it's not only your department, it's the university, and then it's not only the university, it's your university and other universities in Quebec, and then it becomes other university in North America and universities in the world. And then you realize, okay, it's not only university, it's the social making of different regions, and then there's push from the industry and AI and technology, and it becomes incredibly interesting. Huge problems come with those positions too, right? Huge challenges, but there's extraordinarily, for me, there was an extraordinarily space of possibilities to explore. And it was very interesting because they were complex problems. They needed thoughtful reflections and complex solution, which is actually quite interesting to deal with because, essentially a faculty member, a researcher wants to tackle difficult problems and solve them.
That's so true. So tell me about Building 21. So you were a professor and then you joined the dark side.
Yep.
And then now you're director of a project called
co-director
of a project called Building 21 at McGill.
Yep.
What's that all about?
Okay, so that's a long passion of mine since actually I became.
Of course, and we've spoken about this for years. So yeah.
But when I became vice provost at Concordia, it was sort of the middle of my mandate. There was this. Remember, there was like the big MOOC wave, right? The MOOCs and edX and all of these things, which sort of actually it was an article yesterday. They're sort of dying off now, but I became really interested in relationship between education and technology because of the position I held at Concordia, which was vice provost teaching and learning. So I really became interested in the interaction between the two, and I've always been interested in technology. My PhD thesis was on the impact of technology on society, so it's always been my passion. And then I would see both that, the private sector was realizing that there's huge amount of money in higher education, huge amount. I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars across North America, but we're talking about huge market. There were also some very exciting things being done by the commercial and private sector, right? Both technologies, attitudes, algorithms, crazy project from Elon Musk to the Google X to all of these things. I mean, those are very exciting projects. Yep. Plus everything that's going on with biology, we just discussed earlier, CRISPR, Cas9, and all these things, they're very exciting. And then I turn around and I'm like, okay, so is the actual higher education quote unquote industry, are we keeping up with this? Are we being pushed aside? Will we still be relevant 10, 20 years from now? And even more importantly, are we giving young people all of the tools, the creative, critical, social, psychological, technical skills they need to be able to thrive, not only be present in the 21st century, but thrive and be happy and solve the new wicked problems of this world? And I realized, I'm not sure. Now, there's
so as being a CEO of a tech company, I can agree with that. There is a gap between the degree and the assessment of the degree, which is your GPA, versus what companies are looking for. And we have a soft spot for McGill because some of the co-founders are from McGill, but we literally go through I mean hundreds of resumes, and it's almost like a diamond in the rough situation. So yeah.
It's funny because in one of the questions you sent me ahead of this interview, you said, what should millennials worry less about? And my answer was right away with grades. Because that's a big worry for students.
It's a good answer.
They shouldn't be worrying about grades much.
But shouldn't they? So here's the question, right? Or here's the problem. For a lot of young people, right? I mean, after housing, your largest debt today is your university, education. And if on one hand we tell them not to worry about grades, but then they have a debt So how do we reconcile with that?
Okay, so I think the situation mostly in the States, it's very different in Canada, and it's very different in European countries. But to me, the current situation in the States is a scandal. I think it's scandalous. I think
Scandalous?
Yeah, I think it's scandalous. I think the amount
Please explain.
I think the amount of money being charged for education is scandalous. I think it's actually will probably, and some economists are trying to say this, it will actually negatively affect the economy of the United States, because students, we know this, right? And 40% of them do not graduate. It's not only that have big debt. It's about I think around the States overall it's about 55 to 60% graduation rate.
That's true.
So 40% do not graduate with debt. Then they can't really buy a house and start investing, and they'll probably push off having a family. I mean, there's serious consequences to this. And, Canadian universities are doing that also with international students, right? In the UK, they're doing a bit of that too. So I don't know at what point we decided that it had to be such, it had to be that way. I'm all for students paying tuition and paying, not free. I don't believe in free. And I think, a reasonable amount of money is
Why
okay.
is that? Why don't you believe in free? I mean, I don't believe in free, but I have my reasons.
Because I think in the experience has shown that things that are free are not usually valued. They're not usually respected. They're thrown away. And I'm not only education, but everything that's free. People we just use it and discard it without really thinking about it. And the experience in Europe of free institutions they're not at least from an infrastructure point of view, they're quite problematic,
right?
Especially in France and other countries where the education is free. And it's free. For example, I can't remember. I believe it's Finland, but don't quote me on this. But one of the Nordic countries has free education, but very, very, very selective admission process.
Yeah.
So it comes down to the same thing. But I believe that you have to, it's the same way when you buy a house, you actually, it's an investment in something, and it comes with some certain costs, but overall it's an investment. I think some reasonable tuition is fair, but reasonable means, something that a student working during the year could mostly handle. I don't want to put numbers there, but something that you could handle, or your parents could handle without having to remortgage their house, or completely starve themselves of other things.
So what about? I think here's a dilemma, right? The degree that you're earning. I think it's more prevalent in the U.S. than in Canada.
Right.
So the degree that students are earning does not match with the workplace. But they are paying a lot of money. So what are your thoughts on, there is a movement around paying off the debt of students and then fixing the system and then moving forward? What are your thoughts on that? And that's A. And then B would be high school education, I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. High school education is free. And we know that when you empower human beings and you invest in human capital and improve the human cognition, productivity increases, and productivity is the main driver of GDP. So wouldn't university being free,
health.
And health, of course. So wouldn't free universities actually lead to more productivity?
One would think so, right? And I think your rationale here is absolutely correct. But one thing I've learned in my career, and I also sat on the Quebec Conseil supérieur d'éducation, which is a body that advises the Ministry of Education. It's a really interesting body on all sorts of questions of education with very, very, very good research. And one thing I realized when I sat on that board is that, there are no simple solutions to any education's question. It's, complex. I think I've told you this before, Danielle, as a facetious thing. That's a friend of mine, an engineer, who's actually sat on the Conseil, told me, she said, Ollivier, she was an engineer, she said, still is, Ollivier, for every complex solution, there's a simple problem that is wrong. Complex problems, need complex solutions. And education is like healthcare. complex problem. So there's no one easy answer to any of the problems that we have, because there's a lot of variables. Some of them we control, some of them we don't control. There's plenty of variables in the education system. Now, free, not free, I don't know. I'm not enough of an expert on these kind of questions, but I would say easily affordable is actually, I think, a major thing to be done. And I agree with you. A more educated country, a healthier country, theoretically is a more productive country. But all this to say, and I want to put a big caveat here, I'm not an American. I'm not an American university, so I read these things from a distance. And they're probably facing other problems, these universities. But what I see in Canada with international students, for example, when I see the rationale of some people saying, well, it's okay because the middle class is rising across the world. Well, the middle class in Asia and Southeast Asia, mostly in Southeast Asia or in Africa, is not exactly the same, money, financially. It's not exactly the same middle class it is in Europe or Canada or the US. So you got to be really careful. We've had students at McGill, we know this, who were able to afford an international tuition because their whole village participated in it. And then the pressure on the young man or the young woman is horrible. So I don't think that's a healthy learning environment. I think a healthy learning environment is where you have some stakes in the system, serious stakes, but stakes that are manageable for a 20, 21, 22, 23-year-old. So your grades, your friends, learning, but putting your whole family in bankruptcy is not a manageable stress for anyone, and certainly not for a 22-year-old.
Yeah, I think this is something, all sides can agree with, is making sure education is affordable.
Yes. And
affordable, again, is subjective. Some can contribute more, some can less. Some work harder, and obviously we have scholarships, which is great. Really appreciate those comments. So I know we took a segue, but I want to come back to Building 21.
Right.
So what is that all about?
Okay, so long segue, but an interesting one. So again, was the university? Let's go back to is the university in general as an industry? Is it conducive to making young people thrive in the 21st century? Are we offering what's needed now? Again, these things, there's no simple answer to that question, right? Because a couple of things. First of all, universities have essentially existed for about 1,000 years, and they've resisted. They survived, other more serious problems than that, right? Like wars and catastrophes and environmental degradation and and genocides and all of these things, and they're still here. There's also statistically, and you know that very well, Danielle, because you're very well versed in all educational statistics. The longer you stay in the system, the better overall your life is.
Yeah, that's.
The correlation is very, very, very strong.
The income of graduates versus non-graduates, it's pretty significant.
The income, the quality of life, the health, all of these things. So there's something the system does right.
Right.
Because the correlation at one point, to make again a facetious comment, the proof is in the pudding at one point, right? And anecdotally, this is very anecdotal. I see young people developing their critical skills. Maybe not to a romantic level that we all believe, it should be, but there is development of critical skills. And overall, if you look at the world, if you look at long term how the world is, there's constant improvement in the world, and all of the all the variables we're measuring about the world, right? The wealth of the world, the quality of the quality of life, the increase in the circle of empathy. So all of these things.
Standard of living,
Standard of living. So this is undeniable also, and I think education has a lot to do with it. And a couple of more things. What you do a professor told me this when I was 20, and I never forgot it. And he said, one of the strengths of university or higher education in general is you'll do things you'll never do on your own because you don't like them.
That's true.
You hate them because you have to read those things. And this is good. And when I organized a conference, 4 or 5 years ago about the University of the Future, and I got all sorts of faculty members and students and staff and other people.
I remember, I was there.
Yeah, you were there. Remember the conclusion is that
University 2030.
right,
Yeah.
2030.
Yeah.
And the sort of conclusion we had is that what makes a university a bit, something that we need to preserve as a principle, is that the bottom line is education.
Right.
It's not profit, which I have nothing against profit, but the bottom line is essentially, education and research, which is an important part of a society. Now, this being said, it's also a big boat that has inertia, that has apathy and comfort, which is, part of all large institutions across the world. Even Google is starting to fall into these things, right? Even they're starting to fall into these things.
I mean, we're having issues these days with the NBA and the protests in Hong Kong.
Right.
Right. For profit, a lot of companies are not speaking out against values. Well, they're taking their position, and to each their own. But yeah, it's interesting.
And Facebook, Google, Amazon. Yeah. I don't know about as much about Amazon, but certainly Google and Facebook. They're starting to have large bureaucracy.
Yeah,
not very different from other large institutions. Yeah. But I'm seeing these things, and I'm seeing things that seem to me quite fundamentally in need of correction. So to me, the most important thing is the one-size-fits-all model of education in general, but higher education in particular. So we know from research, this, because you guys do a lot of research on these things, there are very different ways of accessing, let's call it that way, of accessing learning and knowledge.
Yeah.
Different levels of maturity in your brain and your cognitive processes. And, one-size-fits-all will work with some people. And it will work, of course, it has worked with faculty members like myself. That's why we are in the institution.
And I mean, to be fair, that's what we've been doing for almost 1,000 years, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
But it's not because we've done something for 1,000 years that it means that it's not wrong.
Fair enough. No, I agree with you on this one.
So one size fits all to me is the main problem. The other one is, for very good reasons, because I've chaired a lot of academic programs committee, both Concordia at McGill, for very good reasons. When new programs come along and they're evaluated within the university, people become very conservative, not because they want to become conservative, people who sit on these meetings, but because they're very, very, very careful about not allowing something to move forward if they have doubt about the quality of the education the students will receive through that program.
And is it because to protect the brand? Or
no, it's to protect the students.
Interesting, protect the students.
Absolutely. They say, when you bring something very, very innovative, they say, yeah, but will the student learn? How will we know that the student learns?
So the efficacy of...
Oh, yeah. And it's an absolute ethical position. It's never a financial position. It could be at one point, and it's still going back to students. And I've asked this question. Some people said, "Are any students interested? Have you looked?" I mean, you don't create a program for yourself. You got to create it for the students. But that's pretty much where it stops in terms of marketing. Later on, they'll say, "Okay, do we have the money?" And there'll be some. But that means that most of the time, because we're very careful about what we bring forward, we fall back on what we know. Right? We fall back onto the things that are a bit more traditional because the correlation is there to say a lot of it works. So the same way as a faculty member will in a classroom, if he or she starts trying technology in a classroom and it's a bit clunky at first, it doesn't work, they'll turn around back to the blackboard, quote unquote, right? Because they're comfortable with it, they know it works, they know how to deal with that. So that's what happens, and I've seen a lot of that. So it's really difficult to get out of it. And in the case of McGill, when I floated the idea of a innovation school lab, I don't know how you want to call it, I realized that for the principal, it was really difficult because, McGill's already one of the top institutions in the world. Her job is to protect the institution, right? Yeah. So something within the institution that challenges it is also a threat because it can break the institution. Yeah. Right? It is. So I realized that the way to do it is to do it a la Google and to create something linked to it, but that doesn't threaten the institution and it doesn't threaten the students. So The 20th century is littered with educational experiments that failed, that were made on the back of students.
Of course. Yeah.
Right? Now, McGill, any institution in North America, some of the good institutions, will have a system, and they'll make sure that students will get many skills that they need to get, right? So you don't want to threaten this, because students are actually, and on top of that, if there's high tuition, the stakes are even higher. And you don't want to threaten that, because the students have a right to have an education that is, at least, from a historical point of view, strong and good. Might not be absolutely appropriate for today, but it is historically something that works.
And do you think this is you're talking about McGill here, right? Which is the equivalent of an Ivy League. Right. It's ranked top 20 in the world and so on. So, while I admire, the whole process of like protecting the students, do you feel that, cuts across the rest of North America and other institutions? Because, from my personal experience, I've seen that. I really do believe, working with now over 350 institutions, I've seen how much they care.
Yes.
And often they don't know what to do because they don't have the capacity and the tools, and that's probably where technology comes in. But they do care. Yes. Right? But at the same time, you see $1 trillion debt. I'm just using U.S. as an example, multi-billion-dollar debt in Canada, and the outcomes are mismatching, right? So the intent is good. The inputs seem to be, with good intent, but we're not getting the output in terms of what students are expecting. So is this the students' problem, or is this society's problem? What's happening here?
Again, look at it's sort of I'm going to cop out a bit here and say, complex problems, complex solutions, in the sense that you won't find one silver bullet to solve that issue. It's, the variables. Why has tuition increased so much in the last 20 years? Well, there's probably, easy identifiable factors, but less easy identifiable factors also. So I'll give you an example, right? So when McGill at one point, I was part of that decision, when we increased tuition for international students. So at one point, the government allowed us to really increase almost as much as we wanted. So between year X and year Y and year X, it increased for international students by a large amount. What happened? More applications.
Okay.
Because for a lot of people, myself included, more expensive means better quality.
Interesting. Yeah, that's true. I
mean, you
buy
a car at $20,000 or $80,000, you think that $80,000 the car will be better quality.
Will be better. Right. It's a shorthand abstraction. As human beings, we use price equal to quality.
So there's many factors in play, right? So the mismatch of skills is there a mismatch of skills, or is there a large increase in the number of students that a university needs to attend to? Some of them with mismatched skills, some of them with, need of all sorts of support, some of them who feel alienated by the culture of the university because they come from another background. And the university has to deal with all of these things. When we say, skills were probably not as mismatched 40, 50 years ago, is because, the great majority of students were people like me, white male,
it's true.
Part of the mainstream, very homogeneous, much easier to deal with, much easier to deal with, right? And of course, on top of that, they were pre-selected in the sense that it was not only that we were all white male of a certain type, but that was before my time in university, but not only were they all white male of a certain type, they were also probably all white male of a certain type and of a certain personality, because they were filtered to keep all the more aggressive and the more people like competition. So very easy to deal with, much easier, let's just say, much easier to deal with. Today, a university is much closer to me to a municipal government.
Interesting.
It's large. People expect a lot from a university. They expect moral positions, political position, health support, healthcare support, good education and research, but also funding and also all of these things, which makes the mission of a university very complex. So to answer your question, it is a complex thing, and there are, in complex systems, there are great failures, but overall I think it's much more successful than it is not. Price aside. That's another question.
Fair enough. That's a good way of putting it. So University 2030.
Right.
So 30 years from now.
That's more like 10 years from now.
Well, 10 years from now. Yeah, exactly. Wow, time flies. So, as someone being in the technology space, we're seeing, AI is a given. Everyone's talking about that. That's one fundamental, shift. We're looking at material sciences, the boom that's going around there. We're looking at biology and biotechnology. That's another huge shift. How do young students prepare for all of this?
When I was working in one of my odd jobs between my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, and I was a waiter in a pizzeria. That was after my experience at New York University for a month, where I had made some friends. One day, I remember it was in February, I think. It was middle of the winter. It was dark. I was walking back from the pizzeria, and I decided to just go into a magazine store, and I started browsing the magazine. And on the cover of Rolling Stone, there was a picture of this friend I had made during that workshop 5, 6 years before.
Interesting.
He had started at the same point as I had, but now he had just completed a documentary on Madonna.
Oh.
He was on the cover of Rolling Stone, and I was a waiter in a pizzeria. That was one of the low moments of my life.
And so how did you cope with that? Like, how did you feel? Was that like fuel for you to do better, or
just work
or
harder.
Life sucks?
Just a bit. Life sucks, right?
Yeah.
You have to feel sorry for yourself for
Yeah,
a while,
that's
but and I was like 25, 26, something like this. You can't start feeling for yourself at 25 and just abandon life.
Yeah.
You just gotta go for it. It's funny because the other day I was speaking to an amazing professor we have at Concordia. His name is John McMaster, and he used to be an opera singer.
Oh,
and now he teaches opera to young students at McGill. And he went to talk to us at Building 21 because I wanted students to see different perspectives on the world, and how do you solve problems creatively from very different perspectives, right? So how do you solve a problem in an opera in front of 1,000 people when something goes wrong, for example, right? It's very different from coding or literature or engineering.
Yeah.
So one of the things he said, and he was talking about this great moment he had at one point, the moments of grace that you have when everything works as one thing, right? And I told him, and I said, okay, but John, what happens, what do you do when it does not when it's bad, because he's a professional, and, it's never going to be bad because professionals have a good level. They're not going to go bad, but it's just clunky that night, right? There's moments where it's clunky. So I said, when it's not going, what do you do? And he told me, I push through it harder.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, I think it's a good life lesson.
I can absolutely relate to that. Yeah, wow. Yeah.
You push through it harder.
Yeah, when life, tries to knock you down, just get up, dust yourself, and jump right back in. And it's sort of a saying I had. I used to tell myself this in college, although I'm not that old, but, it's been a while, which was, regret is far worse than failure. Like, one thing,
right.
It's, like, you don't want to go ahead in time and then look back and ask that what if question, right? And that to me is far worse than at least trying,
right, and
failing. And that kind of comes into an interesting point around, we spoke about 2030. We're talking about millennials, Gen
right.
Z. So how do we enable the current generation, because it's a complex time for them, right? And I mean, we're finally recognizing global challenges, right? We have climate change. There is economic uncertainty. We're just at the peak of maybe that's not still not the peak, but it's the longest running sort of boom or bull run that we've seen in probably recorded history.
I think, yeah.
Probably. I mean, in terms of the stock market, right?
Right.
I take back the steam engine industrialization. That's probably higher. But we're in a very, very good time.
Right.
And so how do we enable students and sort of folks who are kind of like going through what you went through, right? When they see their friend on the cover of Rolling Stone and they're a waiter in a pizzeria, I mean, how do they make sense of it all? Or I guess maybe how did you make sense of it?
Yeah, I think that's a better it's a better question for other people, because we tend to give advice as if our life experience will apply to everyone else. I think it goes back to what I told you in the beginning. I think I knew of my strength. I knew I wanted to pursue this. My strength, I'm very good with words. Words is something I do. I have a lot of facility. A lot of it. It's very easy for me, right? Writing is something I enjoy. I've worked really hard on it, and I write well, and I can develop my ideas, and I enjoy doing this, and I like reading. So this is sort of my realm. And I knew that from the beginning, right? Because I was very good. I was an early, not a genius by any means, but I was early, when I was young, reading came very easily to me.
Right.
Writing came easily to me, even though I made a lot of mistakes, it came easily to me. So I knew that. I knew that thinking about these problems was also something I really enjoyed doing. I think I was lucky in the sense that my father and my mother were very resilient people in very different ways. So my mother was born in Berlin in 1939. So by the time she was 6, bombs were raining down on Berlin, and there was almost nothing left of Berlin.
Wow.
And probably...
So your parents were German?
My mother.
Okay.
So my mother was German, born in Berlin. So, the war ends in 1945, but until, Germany doesn't become minimally acceptable for at least another 4 or 5 years, right?
Yeah, wow.
So she lived through this, and she became, a woman with kids and a husband, and they moved to Canada and had a successful life, and now she's a adjunct professor at UQAM, Université du Québec. So, it's a great life.
Wow.
Lived from very difficult, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Plus all of the guilt that went with being a young German after the war, right?
Right.
The guilt from your parents and everything that happened before. My father's a bit different. So he came from a wealthy family, but in Tunisia, and he was born in 1932. And then he decided very early on to become an artist. His father was a successful businessman, and his father was probably a bit more conservative, but his father supported him, and he sent him to Paris, where my father went to l'École des Beaux-Arts, which is the big art school in Paris, and he actually got out of it with, the first, he got out of it as being, he was first in his promotion in sculpture, which still is, but it was very prestigious before. It was called Le Prix de Rome. So that means that when you came out, it was a contest at the end, and the sculpture. The sculpture that was chosen as the best one, the artist was given a 4-year scholarship.
Wow.
In the Villa des Médicis in Rome, which belongs to the French government, which is where I was born. So my father was a sculptor, and then he came to Quebec with my mother, and he had a job at Université du Québec. So I sort of had my parents as an example of people who pretty much did what they wanted to do, and they were successful at it, becoming artists and working in academia. So maybe I was naive. Maybe I thought it would be easy because I knew that culture of academia, and also I knew that my strengths applied well to that industry, right? So going back to how did I get out of it? I think I'm lucky that I have a good genetic makeup in the sense that I don't get depressed very easily. Right? And it's not part of my DNA. I tend to see the world, I'm not the glass is half full kind of guy. I'm the glass is full kind of guy. I see the glass full everywhere. So that helps me, and I have no credit for this. No credit for this. It's just who I am. I have my biological making makes life pretty more rosy than dark for me as a natural posture. That helps also. It's a difficult question because going back in hindsight it looks easier than it is. We had some very dark moments. I believed in education.
What was your darkest or something that you remember growing up?
Well, that thing I just told you about the pizzeria, that was probably personally not the darkest moment of my life, because you have dark personal relationship kind of thing, moments,
of course,
death and these things. But in the sense of professional moment, that was really like, okay, so I'm like billions of light years away from where I should be when we started from the same point, right? And he had what I wanted to have.
Right.
I wanted to be like a director in Hollywood, and I was in a pizzeria in Montreal serving, slices of pizza while he was doing a film on Madonna and being on the cover of Rolling Stone.
How was the pizza?
Well, the pizza was good.
Yeah, there you go.
But I never really, I never really quit. And again, maybe I'm like a broken record here. Does that image still work? Broken record?
Yeah, it does.
Okay,
it's relevant.
because who has records today?
Yeah, and nobody has records, but yeah, we still
record.
use.
So I feel like, but because I always, not always, but most of the time, I relied on my strength and I fell back on my strength. That gave me a lot of self-worth. It gave me pleasure, because in these things I was good, and people would recognize that I was good, and I would get, not very often, but I would get good feedback, and I would feel like, okay, this is interesting. I'm doing this. It's working. I can do it. I can be one of the good ones at it. So that was very, very, very useful for me. And I would say I'm a strong believer that, we all have very strong strengths in certain things. And I see students who are pushed away from their strengths. It happens often, especially international students who are pushed into STEM disciplines and they wanted to go into arts or, artistic disciplines. And they're
Asian parenting 101.
Yeah. And they're quite unhappy. And I understand why the parents are doing this. It's very legitimate. The students are unhappy. I think your strengths, but again, one of the questions you had asked me and what you sent me earlier was that, what do you do in an arts degree? So follow your strengths goes with realizing that your strengths are not exclusive to one job. Yeah. So again, going back to something about, if you're very good artistically for images, if you're a great painter or somebody who draws very well, or somebody who sculpts very well, somebody who does virtual images and digital images very well. Well, there is more than just, art for that. I mean, there's all sorts of disciplines that need these skills of being able to take something out of thin air and making a form out of it, right? You could see, all sorts of industries need this. So following your strength goes hand in hand with realizing that what your strengths are in many different jobs and industries. Many different, and you can be happy in many of them. So if you think that your happiness only relies on one job, the problem with that is that, you may not get it. And on top of that, job, may not correspond to your strength. So
that's true.
If you're very dedicated, hardworking students who studies medicine, for example, right, for different reasons, well, maybe that student's main strengths are not in medicine. They're in some place else, right? Maybe the student is, hardworking enough and dedicated enough to make it work. and the students becomes, I don't know, a nurse, or a doctor, or a general practitioner, but they can't find a job. They'll find a job, but they can't find a job in a city they like, for example, right? So they're in somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Canada, USA. And then they realize it's not really their strength. So their job is not really the one they want, and it doesn't really match their strength. So there's two different mismatch here. And I think that creates a lot of tension and sadness among many people. So I would say the students, really the key is to figure out, follow your strengths, and realize that they belong in many, many, many industries usually.
Okay, wow, no, that's super helpful. And in fact, often you hear that when it comes to Gen Z millennials, we're the entitled generation, and I don't agree with that assessment. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I had 2 points of view on this one. The first one was when I was senior administrator, and most students, the great majority of students I would interact with were student politicians, and that entitlement feeling I had, it was very strong. Going back, becoming a faculty member again, and even though I had that feeling, there was something in the back of my head that said, statistically, we know that no generation can be painted with one or two words. Generations are too large a sample of people.
Yeah, that's true.
There's too many things in any type of generation. There are some characteristics, but again, how many times do they apply to people, or how many people like myself would sort of adapt their behavior to what they think they should be doing in their generation, right? But I knew in the back of my head it didn't make sense. Also knew in the back, well, not in the back of my head, I also knew that statistically this is the generation that has, the most educated, the least health problems, the least, teen pregnancy, use of drugs. I mean, it's a very good generation.
And with the internet, access to information.
Access to information. Yeah. And I think it's the most compassionate generation we've had.
That is true.
They really care about other people, about minorities, about the environment, about great things. They truly care about this. And when I became, so even though I had this sort of tension because of some of the students I was dealing with, when I became faculty member again, I met, and I still meet, the most incredible young people. But they are extraordinarily anxious about the future. And I really get it. I mean, the pressure they feel from mostly the coming environmental apocalypse is something that weighs them down very, very strongly. And I think it is very difficult for them. But they're young people. They make mistakes like every generation of young people have made mistakes. They're passionate, like, young people are passionate. They see the world mostly, not always, maybe even mostly is probably a bit of an exaggeration, but they tend to see the world in black and white tones because that's what happens when you're that age. It's just cognitive development.
Yeah.
It's not, you gotta, but young people are also the ones that push society, they push the envelope, they force society to think about things differently. The gender question today is something that for people my generation, I'm 56 years old, something for my generation is
it's probably unheard of. Yeah.
It's very difficult.
Yeah. Okay.
It does that understanding doesn't come naturally. You have to sit down and say, okay, it makes sense, but we're raised in a world where these things were clearly separated and they were clearly defined and everything was built around it, right? Not only your politics, but your clothing, your
washrooms, public
washrooms,
places.
your cars, the furniture, everything was built around that. Everything, and it was like it felt very normal and natural. So, these pushing the envelope on that point is an important part of realizing what science is now telling us. It's it's a large spectrum, and it's a fluid and moving spectrum of what you believe your gender is. And that's what young people do, right? So through their passion and sometimes through their, way they see the world a bit in black and white, but they also push the envelope. They push us towards, out to look outwardly, which is absolutely important for a society if it doesn't want to fall into inertia and apathy. But it is always it's always difficult for the older generation, and it's not a new thing. I'm
Yeah.
sure in times of the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks, they had the same problems.
Yeah, well, I would say they're probably more open, the Greeks and the Romans, to gender or aspects related to that versus, but that's a whole
Right.
rabbit hole down history,
Right.
and I can go talk a lot about that. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, and I want to sort of switch gears here. We spoke about the present, and we spoke about your past. You're also an author of 13 books, right? And a lot of that has to do with the future and
Right.
futurism.
Right.
You wrote an interesting book on microbiome or microbes and viruses,
Right.
and mainly, human beings are more sort of, we think we're in control, but it's the microbes that are in effect controlling us.
Seems like it.
It seems like it. So can you talk a bit about that?
Well, one of the things that was really interesting in the last few years, right, is what we call the microbiome, which is the total number of entities and species that live within us, and we're talking like huge amount, huge numbers.
I mean, hundreds of billions.
Hundreds of billions. There were, and that's been criticized recently, but I'm sorry, a few years back, there were, a lot of some scientists saying that something, I can't remember the exact number, but something like 70% or 80% of your genes were actually, genes of microbes within your body, not your own genes. But that's been sort of
Yep.
debunked recently. But there is still a large proportion of what we have inside us that essentially are alien bodies within us. So that is really interesting when you think about what does it mean exactly to be human. And research now in the microbiome seems to see correlation and maybe causality between mental health problems and your microbiome, health-related problem and what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, health-related problems in your microbiome, even the way you think, and there's even seems to be some link with autism.
The type of food you want to eat, the desire to eat.
Yes. So it seems to be, quite enmeshed with who we are. And it's actually fascinating. But what does it mean to be Daniel Jamil or Ollivier Dyens when you think about all of these things? What does it mean that we have all of these living beings within us? And on top of that, your cells supposed to, your whole cell makeup supposed to change every 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And why do we still believe that we're the same person? Why do we still have this thread within our head that, from birth to now, in my case, and for you also, you're much younger than I am, you still believe you're the same person. You've grown, you've matured, but you still are the same person. It's quite fascinating. And to me, it's a beautiful area to explore because the same way as we just discussed with young people, these types of discovery push the envelope and they force us to think, okay, the world is more complex than we think, and the world needs to be seen from a different perspective. And what we believe are definite, clear borders of what the human can be and is actually much less well defined. And that opens up all sorts of possibilities. Suddenly, it's when we realize, for example, genetic makeup, that there's very little differences between, it's almost like, there's almost no differences between you and I genetically, because, between us and a primate, there's about 2% genetic difference, and we share 60% of our genes with a fly, right? So between you and me, there's absolutely...
That's crazy, no? I mean, like, small amount of variation in the genome is the difference between, a fly or a chimpanzee and us. And I mean, we'll definitely talk about CRISPR-Cas9, but in the future, once we start to enhance, will those proto-humans see us in the same way? Anyways, but
to me, what's really interesting, Danielle, is that suddenly there's like a sort of a kinship that can be thought of between every living being. We share, and then you have to say, racism between what we used to call race, which of course human races do not exist. There's just one race, one species, but different.
Although at one point in time, we had other great apes as well, right? Like,
right.
I mean, one of the major theories is our biggest accomplishment as Homo sapiens is we've wiped out Neanderthals or sort of interbreed. I mean, there's multiple theories, but at the end of the day, we basically came out as a winner, and the rest did not survive. So,
I think we're the only species that has only one sort of subspecies of it, right?
Yeah.
I think we're the only one. But to me, what's really interesting when you push the envelope like this is suddenly, how can you even imagine racism when there's between you and I, two different individuals, there's essentially no differences genetically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The differences we see are extraordinarily superficial. And it's the same thing with the microbiome. What does it mean about the fluidity, if we go back to the earlier conversation, the fluidity of gender, when there's fluidity even in your ontology, who you are, what you think you are. They're just, you said it. I mean, what you eat can be influenced by your microbiome, but the way you eat can also change your microbiome, which will probably change the way your brain works. So that means, fluidity is not a fantasy because it exists everywhere. And it also, again, to me, it's really interesting that the same way that we can imagine that a human being is a machine, it's a thinking machine, we can also, because we can see that behavior is something you can predict, and you have a lot of data, you can see that behavior is something you can pull out of data easily, and that human beings are extraordinarily predictable.
On average, yes.
On average.
Given
right.
enough data.
Right,
Yeah.
given enough data
And
on
in a
average.
crowd, yeah.
But then you can also say that, well, if that's the case, then we're all machines in this world, like living machines, right? But you can also say that, well, the positive spin on this is that those machines that we are, that are able to experience beauty and the sublime and art, maybe these feelings are also universal. Maybe they belong to the entire living realm at different level.
So I love the sort of, the rosy picture and the optimist
Told you
view.
the glass is full. For
Yeah,
me all the
no,
time.
and honestly, I'm an optimist as well. However, one thing that does strike me as a bit more dystopian, and it's sort of how you mentioned, right, that genetically we're the same, right, and yet we have all these variations around, whether it's racism, tribal mentality. I mean, that's the best way to call it. And it's not just human beings, right? Wolf packs, lion prides, they all exhibit that, right? I'm part of tribe A versus B. When we get into a point where humans start genetically enhancing themselves, right? They're cognitively smarter, they're stronger, they're opening neural pathways that, potentially we couldn't even problem solve at that level or at that dimension. What sort of kinship would they have, right? And maybe
with
it's
each other or with
let's say the humans versus the post-humans, or I believe Yair calls it the Homo Deus, right? Like the post-humans. I mean, we seem to be heading towards that sort of a landscape. Maybe it's going to be, everyone gets enhanced and, human population uplifts. But having read enough history, that's not always the case. So now we sort of have this situation as dystopian where you have a small minority, which is, we do have a small minority right now, that, Pareto principle applies, that, has a lot of resources.
Right.
They will use those resources to further enhance themselves, and for the first time in human history, biologically, right? And that's a big shift. And then there's another macro trend happening, which is with intelligence and resources, right? Automation and AI. So a king, as an analogy, a king in the medieval times still required human beings because they were the most intelligent resource available, right? I mean, that's sort of the argument. But today, so I mean, you need peasants to work. You need an army who's going to fight for you. But today, why would a general, need an army that needs to be fed, that could mutiny, that has all these thoughts, right? Versus, automated robots and drones that can do all the work. And so it's sort of like I see two macro trends coming in. One is automation and AI.
Right.
And then the other one is genetic enhancements, and of course it's going to be expensive, and once that small segment of society starts to uplift, would they even identify themselves as the same species as the rest of humanity? Because if you look at Columbus, when he goes back, it's a pretty clear case, right, of how it turned out. So anyways, I'm just throwing out a couple of macro trends, and yeah.
They're difficult questions, but let's go back to your Columbus example. I think that if we look at the way we treated human beings 500 and 600 years ago and 1,000 years ago, and the way we try to treat them today, there's a huge amount of improvement. I'm not saying things are rosy everywhere, but in principle, in the fact that we have human rights charters all over the world, and it's part of most constitutions around the world. And we have the, what's it called, the International Tribunal for Crimes Against Humanity. And, these things actually make a difference. And even in war, we have terms of engagement. And
Geneva Convention.
Right, Geneva Convention, terms of engagement, things you cannot do. There's a huge amount of improvement in the way we treat each other and the way we treat the world. The circle of empathy keeps increasing. It used to be me and my direct kins, and then it became me and my family, me and my extended family, me and my village, and now it's us and almost the environment, right? So for some people and a lot of people, it's now we're adding what's the word would be organic, non-animal things within the circle of empathy.
Yeah.
So the trend is actually very positive. Now, to answer your question is, I think the mistake most of us do, myself included, is, first of all, we see the world in linear terms, right, that we project from today. We also see the world in a way that the future will happen to us. When I think the future is much more a bit like quantum theory in the sense I'm not an expert, so I'm just talking very metaphorical terms here. But it's like all the possibility exists until you act upon them and they collapse into reality, right? Yep. So the future is not something that happens to us; it's something we keep building, not just moving towards. We actually keep building it by the decisions we make every day. And I think Kevin Kelly has said it best. I think it's one of my favorite quotes. He said, technology brings a lot of good and a lot of bad. And he said, I believe it brings a bit more good than bad. And over 1,000 years, it makes a huge difference. So, we tend to see it. Is it good or is it bad? Well, it's like human beings, right? It's complexly good and bad at the same time. And the phone's the best example. The iPhone, the smartphone's the best example of, the thing that brings a lot of bad things and a lot of great things. Probably a bit more good than bad. Now, so I'm an optimist. And when I see the trend, 1,500 years ago, anyone who have said, one day we'll have a world where owning a slave will be considered despicable and illegal, people would have said, yes, such a dreamer.
Yeah.
500 years ago it was probably the case too.
Same thing in monarchy, right?
Right.
That was a shocker. Karl Marx and the whole, that was a big shock to the system. Yeah.
For me, when the Soviet Union fell, when the wall fell, I was like, oh my God. It was just the future is not linear. We tend to, and I think the data is very clear on this, is that, for every variable that you measure, things are improving in this world. And Steven Pinker and other people have said it very clearly, Hans Rosslin also, right, is that there's less crimes, and the crime rate, plummets, has been plummeting for a number of years. People are kinder to each other, even though that's not what we perceive, but the actual reality is very different from what we perceive from the media. So that's the first part of that answer. The second part is...
So do you feel, for the first part, the polarization, right? So I love the model or your thoughts around empathy increasing. And you see that, right? You see that in for example, folks who are going vegan, right? And it's a moral stance.
Right.
And now I eat meat, but I can totally respect that, right? And they are taking a moral stand on the cruelty that's been done to animals.
Right.
Example, climate change, another one, right?
Right.
It unites us.
Right.
It's a human problem. It's
Yes.
not a state problem. So then at the same time, you sort of see this polarization, or maybe it's a U.S. thing, and you know, with the right and the left, right? And it's sort of like one side versus the other. So in some ways, we're seeing, you know, empathy increasing, but in other ways, we're seeing more sort of conflict. And sometimes I wonder if that's just a case of, you know, expanding and easier and faster communication, or I mean, echo chambers and things like that. So you know, just curious to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Again, these things are, you know, as much as we can, I think, measure, quantify the, you know, some variables about how, you know, how much improvement has been going on in this world. It's sort of more difficult to quantify things like polarization, right? We can quantify whether, you know, there are more democracy or less democracy, more in the world, but that's a very crude instrument. Polarization is hard, and I understand what you're saying because I feel it too, but has it actually increased? Is it only because it might be a blimp on the road where suddenly it's more acceptable to say things that were not acceptable 5 years ago? Is it a trend, or, you know, the last gasp of a dying traditional world that's, you know, is about to, you know,
Just
pass
the last
away?
speed bump or the storm.
It's hard to say. Again, I think it's you know, going back to one of the questions you've asked me about the millennials is how to get, you know, out of the funk. Is, you know, it's you should not, I think, look at the world from a very micro perspective, you know. Next month, next year. Just look at the longer trend. Of course, the longer trend can also be scary because there's environment, but overall, there's great things happening. And I'm not a big fan of trying to analyze, you know, current events. Maybe because of my age. Maybe because what I'm seeing today seems to have happened 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago when I was a younger man. Pretty much the same thing, and I see this sort of repetition. So, you know, that would be the first part of my answer. The second part about, you know, genetic modification and improvement. Well, there's this bioethicist. His name escapes me here, but this bioethicist who said, "How can we not offer people the chance of genetically improving themselves?"
Yeah.
Right. If your kid has, you know, if you're, you know, an unborn kid has some sort of grave, you know, disease, and we can genetically modify its genome for him or her to not have that disease, how would you not do it? I'm not, again, worried about improvement because we've done this for thousands of years. Yes, you're right. It was the first time we're doing it biologically, but we've, you know, education is the best example of how we try to prove ourselves and separate ourselves from others. But the trend of education, with all the problems that we've mentioned before, the trend of education is not less access overall in the world. It's more access overall if you compare it to 50 years ago. It might be a bit different from 20 years ago, but compared to 50 years ago, it's more access.
That's true. And not just for the West, but for the entire
whole world. Even for, you know, you look at the level of education for young girls across the world, even those are improving. So, you know, I think the more complex, the more technological, the more educated we become, the more compassionate we become. That seems to me to be the trend. The less sophisticated, if you want to call it that way, quote unquote, right? And I'm not saying sophisticated in a cosmopolitan way, the kind of wine you drink, but sophisticated in the sense of human beings in the 21st century, able to deal with all sorts of complexity in their world. Social, economical, technological, all of these things, the more sophisticated you become, the more gentle you seem to become also. Now, there was this really interesting book that came out recently. It's called The Goodness Paradox. And the goodness paradox asks the following question. It says, okay, so we know, and you probably have heard this, Danielle, that there was this great experiment in the 50s and 60s in I believe, in Russia with foxes. And they
the color of the foxes.
Right.
Black
And,
and, yeah,
right.
yeah.
How do they tame them? How do they domesticate them?
Their,
right. And they see that physically they become, they actually change
They went from black to silver foxes.
Silver foxes, the fact that a domesticated animal has spots of white is also an example of this. Your jaw actually becomes smaller. The differences between male and female decreases.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, and we don't know why, but the size of the brain decreases also.
Interesting.
Yeah, they don't know why. But all this to say, it's well, okay, but look at this, but. Okay, we know now with animals, we can see it. So, a wild animal and this domesticated animal are fundamentally different. They're almost different species. But then, some scientists have turned around and said, but humankind seems to be quite domesticated, right? And we have all the characteristics of this domesticated species.
Well, I would say that,
physically.
Physically. Yes. I would say the exception of a few pockets and few cultures, but yes.
Right, but if you look at overall, and if you look at the number of human beings were quite domesticated. Yeah. And then the question was, who domesticated us, right? And then the hypothesis in the book is really interesting, is that it was self-domestication. In every society, the most violent member of the society is usually eliminated. The more intelligent and usually the more compassionate one, not every time, but is usually the ones who move forward are able to reproduce more often.
Over the long run,
Over the longer period, right? And the more violent, even kings, even monarchs, essentially people got rid of them. So there was a sort of self-domestication that's happening in human beings that's been happening for thousands of years. And I think it continues down this line where anecdotally, again, I think most parents in Western countries, at least, because I'm certainly not an expert from countries outside of the Western world, and it's a different thing. And I'm pretty sure it's the same thing, but I don't want to assume anything. Will tell their kids to be respectful, mindful, generous towards others, not hurt others, including animals. That's the education we're giving. The other pockets where they say be aggressive and, kill thy neighbors. But most cases it's,
They get, sidelined.
Most of the thing is we're domesticating children to become more, kinder members of our society.
And so do you see,
and the Gen X is a good example of that.
No, absolutely. And so do you see the whole polarization? I think you kind of mentioned maybe that's one of the last speed bumps.
Think it is. Of a dying world.
Of a dying world.
Mm. Yeah. I hope. That's my hope. Might be wishful thinking. But, you look at, I was reading an article that said even evangelical young people are much more tolerant than their parents and grandparents.
Yeah.
Even in a subsection of America, which tends to be much more conservative, they tend to be much more open to differences than their parents and grandparents for different types of reasons. So if you look at young people these days across the world, they seem to be mostly more compassionate, generous, and able of protecting, to go back to your original question, protecting the least protected. And the least powerful. So I'm not too worried about, misuse of, genetic engineering. It will happen because, of course, it will happen like it happened in China recently. It will happen. It will be probably not the way we're going to do things. And to go back to your example about the general who doesn't need soldiers and robots, what would he need? Well, I can ask the question, why do we need to go to the theater to see a movie? Why do we need to go to the stadium to watch a sports game? Because it's much more pleasant to watch football, hockey, baseball, whatever in your comfort of your living room.
So you're saying people want to go to war?
Yeah. No, I said people want to be with each other.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
We're social beings. We need the company of others.
And in a way, if you follow, early empires, I mean, we can go all the way back to the Greek, Romans, Arabia, and so on, moving forward. Yes, so in terms of like casualty, especially like for soldiers, that has been decreasing as well.
Oh, hugely,
and
huge
so another hypothesis of the future is, well, if you do have automation, and whichever side effectively has better machines, and machines do the fighting.
Right.
So we're not going to talk about machine rights right now. I think it's too early for that.
I agree.
Maybe in 100 years, but whichever side wins, effectively, there's no human damage, and hopefully no collateral. And I would say it'll get to a point where it's cyber warfare, right? So you don't even have to have atoms, fighting with each other, where you can just, the bytes can figure it out, right?
But
because
the collateral is high in cyber warfare.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So one potential output could be that the algorithms figure out who's going to win or lose, and then the algorithms figure out, okay, here's the terms, and the humans
before we
move on
engage
with
in
it.
war, right?
Before we engage in war,
Right.
and we move on with our life. But then the question comes in, is if the algorithms are making all the decisions, who's deciding for the deciders?
It's the great question of our age, right? Is in machines that will need to make quick life and death decisions. They will. They already are. So I'm doing this, but it will increase the number of quote unquote intelligent machines making very, very fast life and death decisions, and that it will be very difficult for us to understand how they came with that answer to the problems, because it's just, deep learning software becomes too complex for us to go back to it.
I mean, in fact, a lot of deep learning algorithms, even the creators cannot.
Right.
I mean, we know we can put in the input and we know the output,
right.
but what's really happening is, we don't really know.
But most of it will be, fairer, more just, less weighted down by biases, conscious and unconscious, than human beings. So you will eventually have two black boxes. We're already a black box. Human beings are a black box. So you and I can articulate all sorts of things, but we have ingrained, and behavioral economics has showed this well enough. Yeah. We have ingrained things that we don't not even aware of, biases and things we do. We're a black box, and sometimes we can articulate part of what makes us decide one thing instead of another, and especially when it comes into a human being who doesn't look exactly like me, or doesn't have the same gender, or the same size, the same skin color. I mean, you can multiply these things. And yes, but the humans are a huge black box. Machines will be, and they're already becoming a black box. But the way we're writing code right now is far from perfect. I understand that. Garbage in, garbage out, right? I mean, you use databases that are full of biases. It will create a system that's just going to reproduce this. But these discussions are ongoing. People are looking at it. They're worried about it. They're trying to make software that's much less biased than a human being. So yes, you will have a black box that's biased, but it'll be a much better one than a human being. And for things as simple as, getting a mortgage, we know that your size, your weight, the color of your skin, the way you speak, your gender, all of these things matter.
Yeah.
When you have to deal with a system, educational, financial, health. And again, some of these things are very unconscious, but they do matter. People are not treated the same way. And we can imagine a world where these things will be addressed from the get-go, from when we write code and algorithm, will be, try to be better, and mostly will probably be studied afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. Now, we don't really know how to judge and how a bank manager makes his decision, because how we're going to get back to it. But an algorithm that's going to judge 1,000 people is going to create data, and then we can go back to, there's a problem here. Look, it's pretty clear. So this is like, a incremental improvement that is much better than human beings, because we're just too, it's hard to find out why a human being is doing something instead of something else. And machines, with all their complexity, will be better built on that point, And we'll be able to go back to the data and saying, oh, there's a problem there, which we are already doing right now, right? People are going back to some of the data, some of the HR software that Google has created, for example, and saying, okay, this says you're not hiring any women, so let's rewrite the code. This is very positive. We don't know how, Bryn has hired people at Google. He can say I like women the way I probably will say I have no biases against women. Is that absolutely true in practice? I believe so. But if I was to hire 1,000 people, would I hire 50 to 50-50? There was an interesting study in the States done, I can't remember, recently, I believe, where they were looking at biases in judges, and they were asking, okay, compared to the median, do you think you have more biases or less biases than the median of judges? I don't know how they found the median, but with decisions, I guess. 95% said I have less biases than the median.
So, of course, I mean,
of course. So we all think we're doing the right thing and we're acting fairly. The data says something else.
So I love how the 95%.
Or it's 90. It was more than 90%.
Yeah, we're 95% said we're less biased than the actual median itself.
Yes.
Which is a very human thing, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
we see that everywhere.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
So I'm optimistic about a better world with machines. And you talked about war again, and a lot of people, there's a lot of dystopian scenario with war machines and automated machines who can actually decide to kill by themselves. And if you look at the Montreal Declaration for AI, right?
Yeah.
They talk a lot about this. The problem with that is the problem I find with this, even though it was a very good document, the problem I find with this is we tend to say in all these documents that talk about the potential danger of AI is that we need a human in the loop, right? That's usually what we say.
And I asked, do we need a human in the loop?
Well, I would go even further and said, do you want a human in the loop? It's not like historically we've shown a lot of restraint in wars, in genocides, in torture, and in murder. It's not as if, in just the way we treat the environment now, do I rather have a human being or an algorithm for which, it's very clearly defined that this situation and this situation does not allow for the algorithm to shoot, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a church nearby, a school, whatever.
And it won't.
Or do I have a human being who, feels all sorts of guilt and things I don't know what they are. Right? I don't know why that person is reacting, right? I don't know. Maybe that person had, a stressful morning. Maybe a parent died. Maybe a kid is really sick in the hospital and the person has, a short fuse that day. I mean, these things do happen with human beings. So, am I worried about, automated robots that on the field? Yes. When I think of it, am I worried about human beings, in war and soldiers? Yes, I am. Probably more than robots.
That makes sense. And so, to summarize, when you look at, and this is part of your educator hat, part of your personal experience hat, and then part of your futurist hat. So when you look, 10, 20, 30 years from now, you've sort of painted a very optimistic, more empathetic world. What would your advice be for, the current Gen Z, millennials, and the whole, just young people in general? What can they expect? And then some things you already mentioned. And what should they be worried about if there are things to worry about?
There always will be things to worry about. I think the list is pretty endless. I think what should they be worried about? There's something it's something they really can't do much about it. But I think one of the biggest challenges we will face is demography. I think it's just like we'll be 9 to 10 billion people soon.
Yeah.
The sheer number of human beings, the sheer that by itself is a huge problem because everyone has a right to live a life of dignity. But that means a lot of pull on resources, and I know because myself I take a lot of resources out of this world. because I live in a rich country and I have a I have a
And we waste a lot of
we waste. So
yeah.
that is a huge problem. What should they worry about? I don't think they should need to worry about one thing. I think they need to focus on solutions and go back and see that Jaron Lanier is the sort of the inventor of virtual reality, because it's not that clear. But he said something that I really liked a few years back. He said human beings are always walking on a tightrope, over a cliff. That's what we do. That's what we're good at. And I strongly believe that's the case. So I think there's so many extraordinary things happening today in labs, in industry, in universities, among social groups, to improve the world, to find solution to the plastic problem, to protect animals, to eat less meat, for example, like Impossible Burger and all of these things, right? I mean, those are the beginning of great solutions that are happening. And I would say that young people, focus on this instead of focusing on the darkness. And Noam Chomsky was really clear when he said, if you focus too much on the darkness, if you let yourself getting caught in that whirlwind of depressive news, well, then the consequence of that is that you just say, screw this, I'm not doing anything anymore. So this is actually negative because you just feel you're so desperate that you won't act on this world. And again, right, the future is like, quantum theory. I mean, all the possibility collapse into something that happens when we do something. Yeah. So the future is not written. There's no, absolutely unavoidable catastrophe 30 years from now. I don't believe that. It's hard sometimes not to believe that when you see the news. But I think that's what I would be my advice. Focus on the things that that human beings are doing well, the potential solution, and the amount of great things we've discovered recently that are making an actual difference in this world. That would be, and there's great, and see problems as amazing, interesting challenges. I mean, rethinking capitalism is actually a fantastically interesting challenge. I don't know how you do it, but people will find a solution to that.
And as we have over, human history. So on that note, Professor Ollivier, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure was for me.
We spoke about your life. We spoke about education. We spoke about, the youth. We spoke about the future, biology, automation, AI. And it's very rare having, someone who can speak to such a broad, with such a broad lens on so many things. And so, for all the folks who are curious to learn more about you or follow you, like do you have a Twitter account? How do people follow you?
I have a Twitter account. The handle is Ollivier_Dyens, or they can have a website that's, Ollivier-Dyens.com.
And that's OLLIVIER-DYENS.com. Perfect.
And I got an Instagram account. They can find me on Instagram where all of these things are. But the website is mostly where I put most of my stuff. So again, it's OLLIVIER-DYENS.com. They'll find all sorts of things there.
And we'll include in the YouTube and the podcast descriptions. We'll share it. Yeah. And if folks have questions, we'll send them your way, or they can just follow you. Sure. But thanks again for your time.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and hope to see you soon again.
And I'll invite people to look at their Building 21. So it's building21.ca. And just one last word about it. It's the idea is how can we rethink higher education in the 21st century by providing a space where the emphasis is on the process and not on the result. So we tell students we don't really care if we get to a result, we care about your process. And one last thing, because it's really something we're really proud of, we've created 2 years ago the Blue Fellowship, and Blue is an acronym for Beautiful, Limitless, Unconstrained Exploration. And we tell students we have money and we'll give you $3,000 fellowships for the summer. We've got about between 15 and 20 of them. And the way you get a fellowship is you gotta submit a moonshot exciting project. So the more it will be difficult to fund through the traditional university system, or it won't be probably accepted by the university system because it's so out there. the more we're interested by it.
Wow.
And we had an amazing project from extraordinarily students, extraordinarily intelligent. And now, the MNI, the Montreal Neurological Institute, is interested in doing some of it, because I think people realize that, and that would be the last thing, because I don't want to take too much of your time, Danielle, but that would be the last thing, is because one of your questions original was, what's the future of universities and how do you see it? To me, Building 21, what it does, and it's not necessarily something that's going to be scaled up, because we have only 25 students. It's very different from 40,000. But to me, the future of university is a university that allows students to explore the space of possibilities. Because we don't know where the solutions are going to come from the new problems we're having. And right now, that exploration is limited.
Yes.
What we do in Building 21 is we open it up and you say, you explore it, and we'll support it, and we'll support you. And because we don't give courses or credits, then
There's no constraint.
there's no constraints, and we're not making an experiment on the back of students. We're not threatening the university. And then the people who come in are the people who are really interested by a fundamental question. But I think that's the case for most students.
Wow, fantastic. Well, thanks again.
Pleasure.
And it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
All right, perfect. Hi. If you like the podcast, head over to our exclusive insight section, where our guests will dive deeper on actionable insights that can help transform your life.